A man named Luis Nunes Rosales, a freshman in a military academy, is asked personal questions for screening. Luis is asked if he needs medical insurance, to which he answers yes for his mother and himself. They fill out paperwork, and the soldier discovers that Luis's mother is diabetic. Luis is further questioned about why he wants to attend the Military Academy of Mexico. He expresses that it's an opportunity to become someone in life and to study. The potential soldiers undress and are sprayed for cleanliness while their bodies are checked. After this, they are called by their soon-to-be Sergeant David and follow him as the soldiers arrange their belongings. A high-ranking soldier appears and welcomes them to the Secondary Infantry Company. He introduces himself as First Sergeant Eugenio Sierra and clarifies that he doesn't care about their life statuses. They will all start on equal footing. Sergeant Eugenio emphasizes that if they successfully complete the training in 4 years, they will become officers in the Mexican Army leading troops. He reminds them of their luck and tells them to remember that comfort and sweet memories are over. They are new men, and any beatings won't be in vain, as it will strengthen them. Sergeant Eugenio didn't want to see them cry when their mothers and girlfriends visited, and asked if he was correct, with everyone responding in unison, "Yes, Sergeant." He noticed someone still wearing a backpack and instructed them to remove it. He emphasized that what they were doing was for Mexico, addressing the extreme violence in the country. He stressed the importance of being ready to sacrifice their lives for their country, making them real men. Sergeant Eugenio wanted them to trust him, assuring them that they would thank him when they were out there. He mentioned being in charge because no one challenged him and vowed to prove it to them. Sergeant Eugenio also stated that if anyone dared to challenge him, they would be exempted from abuse for the entire year just for having the courage to confront him. Sergeant Eugenio asked if there was someone brave enough to challenge him, but no one responded. He expressed disappointment, questioning if they were afraid the camera would catch them kicking his ass. Sergeant Eugenio reassured them that the cameras couldn't see anything in the dark. The next morning, a soldier was running alone while soldiers were sleeping. One soldier's bed caught fire, waking him up to extinguish it. A sergeant shouted at them, and all the soldiers woke up in the open grounds. The soldiers lined up, and an assistant from the first company reported a second-day deserter in the first company. The second company assistant also reported, and a soldier named Mouse asked Luis if the drill was cool for him, to which Luis agreed. In the cafeteria, soldiers were eating, and Mouse instructed Luis on sitting straight and moving the spoon at a right angle. When asked how Mouse knew these things, he shared that his parents also came from the military, and he was the only one among his siblings who enlisted. They chatted with their neighbors, where Mouse introduced Luis to Mario and Arturo. Mario asked Luis if it wasn't bad, and Luis agreed, leading to laughter. Lopez complained about not having water, and they were reminded by Lopez that they needed to wait for the superiors. Lopez scolded them, giving them 10 seconds to finish their food. They hardly ate, except for Mario, angering Lopez. A higher-ranking officer intervened, directing them to another location. There, they were told by the superior officer that they were weak and would be strengthened in the open grounds. Some soldiers fired their guns at targets, but the higher-ranking officer shouted to hold fire, and they all stopped. Mario asked Luis where he was from in another language, and Luis replied that he was from Ax-Agitlán. Luis then asked Mario where he was from. Mario shared that he's from Nayan, not far, according to Luis. Mario then asked Luis how often he would go home, and Luis said maybe once a month. Mario questioned Luis about not speaking in the N-Adia language, but Luis expressed a preference for Spanish. Mario mentioned that he would go home every week, and that he has a 9-month-old daughter. Initially, Luis thought having a child was not allowed, but Mario clarified that it wasn't mentioned. Luis asked who takes care of Mario's child, and Mario shared that his girlfriend, who lives with his mother, looks after their child. Mario explained that his mother's support was a significant reason for him joining the military academy. High-ranking soldiers named Sergeant Herrera and Sergeant Carrasco were walking when they noticed a soldier still wearing a cap. The soldier who hadn't removed his cap was promptly ordered to do so. The soldier who was caught still wearing a cap was scolded, and while the soldier with the cap was being disciplined, a higher-ranking officer intervened. Sergeant Herrera asked another soldier personal questions in the open grounds. The soldiers were marching forward when a higher-ranking soldier ordered them to stop, and they all halted. They called a soldier named Arturo and asked him about his right foot. When he pointed to it, he was instructed to do 20 push-ups. The higher-ranking officer then told the soldiers to be at ease and left. As the soldiers were about to leave, they helped Arturo stand up, and everyone departed. As they were about to leave, a high-ranking soldier called Luis, and he joined them. They walked towards Sergeant Eugenio and had a conversation. Sergeant Eugenio had Luis sit beside him and mentioned that they should talk as equals. He asked Luis why he seemed nervous, and Luis shared that someone told him he was a good shot, learning from his father. Sergeant Eugenio jokingly mentioned that lending weapons even to children is illegal in the army. He then asked if Luis was on leave for the weekend. Luis remained silent, so Sergeant Eugenio informed him they had work on Saturday and would leave early. Luis agreed, and Sergeant Eugenio expressed that he liked Luis, saying he was a good kid, then dismissed him. While the soldiers were getting ready, the lights suddenly went out, and a high-ranking soldier shouted for everyone to be in bed in 10. They all laid down on their beds and went to sleep. In the morning, they went to the car to proceed with their mission. While on the way to their mission, Eugenio handed each of them a gun. When Luis asked where they were going, Eugenio simply replied that they had orders from above. Upon arrival, they positioned Luis in the driver's seat and told him he would be driving. Once they exited pretending to deliver flowers, Eugenio and the group swiftly entered a house. When a woman opened the door, while Luis daydreamed about an academy scene, he was awakened by Eugenio knocking on the car. He snapped out of it, quickly opened the door, and drove the car. Later, they went to a bar where their group got into a brawl. The next morning, the students participated in the opening ceremony. Afterward, Eugenio met with his girlfriend Andrea, excited to see each other. They kissed passionately. Eugenio updated Luis about his mother's condition, while Luis shared stories about school and the area with Andrea as they conversed. Mario approached them and introduced his wife and child at the school. The cadets were forced to bow down with their heads pressed to the ground by the sergeants. Suddenly, Arturo fainted. Instead of being alarmed, the sergeants kicked and insulted him in the gym. Mouse teased Luis about becoming a sergeant, while Mario warned him to be careful. Mouse mentioned it's normal inside, and they would do the same to the next freshman. In the middle of their class, Eugenio and his group arrived. He whispered something to the instructor, who left. Eugenio took over and pretended to be their instructor. They were taken out of the classroom, and as they walked, officers hurled insults at them. Eugenio approached Luis, put his arm around him, and led him ahead of the soldiers. When they were far enough, Eugenio directed Luis towards the bushes on the side leading to a forest. While walking, he noticed a dog in the distance. Luis got near the dogs and caressed one of them on the floor. Luis lay staring blankly when his companion approached. Mouse asked him where he went, and Luis answered that he was hiding. Mouse mentioned taking them to the pool where they nearly drowned. Luis asked if they were okay, but his companion, Arturo, said he had a worse experience. On the other hand, Luis was accompanied by his fellow soldiers, who left him with Sergeant Eugenio for a conversation, seating him beside Luis, who told him that he did a great job at their mission and they would remain together. Eugenio assured Luis that as long as he stayed with him, he wouldn't face the punishments imposed on the others. Luis responded modestly, expressing gratitude. Their conversation also touched on Luis's girlfriend, with Eugenio asking about her prowess in bed and advising Luis to have her bring friends along. On the other hand, a masked man was walking amidst the soldiers' sleeping quarters, coinciding with the soldiers waking up and getting out of their beds. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, the soldiers were playfully teasing their fellow soldiers, applying soap on them and pushing them on the floor. In the forest, the senior soldiers ordered their fellow soldier to undress and face the trees. Eugenio wanted Luis to demonstrate respect by handing him a stick to use for spanking his friend. Luis hesitated as the person involved was his friend, prompting the sergeant to shout at him to carry out the act. In a dream, Luis was searching for Arturo while walking and running when suddenly the alarm in their room rang, and they all stood up. Luis asked his companions if they had seen Arturo, receiving consistent answers that they hadn't seen him. On the other hand, the senior soldiers arrived, instructing a fellow soldier, a friend of Luis's, to pack up while taunting him. While they were cleaning the bathroom, they discussed how Arturo might be doing. One of their companions left to get soap, and Luis told Mario that he should just lie about Arturo. However, Mario responded by saying they couldn't bring themselves to ruin him. Later, Lou and Mario left to get medicine for Lou's mother. Afterward, they went to the vehicle terminal, and before parting ways, Mario asked Luis what time he would return on Sunday. Lou replied at third, and Mario said he would be around by first. Then they separated. Luis arrived home, and his mother greeted him. She mentioned that Luis's uncle couldn't accompany her to the clinic the next day, so Luis volunteered. During dinner, while eating, Luis brought up that he wanted to drop out. His mother stood up, went to the kitchen, and asked if he didn't care about her. On the other hand, Luis approached his mother in her room, where she was crying and watching television. Luis asked his mother if she was accompanied to the clinic by his uncle, and she answered yes. He also asked what she wanted for dinner, but his mother said no. Luis simply mentioned leaving medicine downstairs, and she thanked him, continuing to cry. Luis decided to look at their photos in the album and inside the cabinet. In the forest, Luis was with his dog, feeding and petting it. On the other hand, the seniors were watching something on their cell phones. Afterward, one of them demonstrated to Luis what they were watching, and he pushed Luis's face into it. Mario saw this and immediately came to Luis's defense. After coming out of the bathroom, Luis thanked Mario. When their senior army personnel arrived and instructed Mario to do something, he simply walked out without complying. During their sleep, their senior army personnel arrived and approached Mario. They woke him up, downed him, and dragged him away. Luis and one of his companions witnessed this, and other members woke up due to Mario's screams. While they stood in line, one of their seniors shouted that they wouldn't report anything. Luis asked his companion why there would be no report and what would happen to Mario. His companion replied that he didn't know either. During class, while the professor was in discussion, Luis suddenly stood up and left the classroom. He went straight to the nursing office to inquire about Mario, but the nurse had no records of him. He then tried to visit General Araga, but the guards stopped him and turned him away. Luis struggled to focus during training as he worried about Mario. Mouse consoled him, suggesting that Mario might have dropped out of the academy. While talking, an officer spotted them not training properly and punished them with push-ups throughout the afternoon. At the cafeteria, Luis and several soldiers were having lunch when their senior instructed them to recite the Colt's prayer. They prayed filled with self-deprecation. After the prayer, they began eating. While eating, Luis saw General Yaga and approached him. He informed the general about the disappearance of a student named Maran Cacho, who was in his platoon. Upon hearing this, the general scheduled a meeting for the next day. As Luis returned to his table, Eugenio asked what was wrong. Luis dismissed it as nothing, but when Eugenio persisted, Luis lied, saying he had a message for the general regarding his father. The next day, Luis immediately went to General Ara's office for a conversation. While waiting for his turn, he noticed a mother leaving and talking to herself, saying that she should have been informed by her child. Out of curiosity, Luis followed the woman and approached her. It was evident that the woman repeatedly cried out her child's name with anguish. It appears that it is a nightmare for Luis, so he screams while covering his ears. Afterward, Luis proceeded to Arriaga's office. Upon his arrival, Arriaga already knew the reason for his visit and asked him about it. He invited Luis to the couch and asked him to sit. Arriaga advised him to look him in the eye and be a man, because probably one day he would become a general too. Regarding his complaint, Arriaga promptly showed him Mario's discharge letter with his signature. Luis, seeing him being beaten, but Arriaga acknowledged knowing about such incidents. However, he assured Luis that there was no foul play involved. After a brief conversation, Luis left as General Araga had other matters to attend to. The next day, Luis accompanied his seriously ill mother to the hospital. During her session, he went out and asked two nurses about the cost of sessions without insurance. Luis bowed his head upon hearing the amount needed for his mother's weekly hospital session. Later that day, Luis, accompanied by Andrea, went to a weaponry shop to buy a sharp knife. Andrea asked him where he would use it, so Luis showed it to her. Upon returning home, Luis immediately pressed his sharp hot knife to Andrea's pink taco in bed. The following day, Luis went to a festival and saw Eugenio and his group there. Upon approaching, he quickly asked about Mario, but one of Eugenio's group halted him. Luis pulled out a switchblade, causing the member to step back. Eugenio intervened immediately, telling his group not to act that way as Luis is their friend. Using his words, Eugenio calmed Luis down and took the blade from him. Eugenio immediately took Luis to a private place in the woods where they had a conversation. Instructed by Eugenio, Luis was told to kill a dog or else they would kill him. Luis hesitated, not wanting to harm the poor dog. However, he was forced by the others with a gun pointed at the back of his head. Luis stabbed the helpless dog, overwhelmed by guilt. He vomited and took a moment to compose himself. He also called Andrea to distract himself from what happened. Despite the disturbing events, Luis continued training with the soldiers that night. A stray dog entered their room, and he tried to wake Mouse, who was fast asleep. It turned out to be a nightmare for Luis after he killed the dog at the practice shooting grounds. He aimed his gun at Eugenio upon spotting him. Mouse quickly intervened, redirecting Luis's gun. Another nightmare troubled Luis. He walked to the bathroom, holding a paddle. Inside, he saw his mother standing with her back turned, seemingly expecting Luis to hit her. Upon arrival, Luis immediately struck her several times. The next morning, Luis saluted the fallen soldiers. Later, he went to the library to read. While reading, Eugenio arrived and asked why he didn't pull the trigger. Luis avoided the question, but Eugenio stopped him and asked him to buy something. Luis quickly bought it and brought it to them, but it was not enough as he had run out of his allowance. As he was leaving, Eugenio pulled him to watch a gory video. That night, as he was about to sleep, Eugenio's group arrived and apprehended him after learning he reported to the general. Luis seized a gun and shot them one by one. When only Eugenio was left, he shot him several times, but Eugenio wouldn't die. The next morning, it turned out to be just a dream. While sitting, he was forcibly removed by two taller soldiers. Eugenio arrived and ordered him to go to the pool. Later, whispering something in his ear, Luis witnessed their comrades chatting at the pool. Upon his arrival, Eugenio dismissed his companions and made sure no one else would enter the pool area. Luis was instructed to join him at the pool wearing only underwear. Luis complied and sat beside Eugenio. Eugenio briefed him about their mission. On Saturday, Eugenio admitted he didn't like what was happening, but wanted to toughen up Luis. He showed Luis the diving board and invited him to jump together. While walking, Luis noticed some underlying intentions from Eugenio. When they reached the top of the diving board, Eugenio suddenly hugged Luis from behind and instructed him to jump. After a few days, Luis seemed distant and lost in thought. His relatives arrived and noticed that Luis was emotionally and physically drained in his room. His younger cousin expressed the desire to become a soldier. Luis initially helped him stand properly, but abruptly changed, scolding the child. Unbeknownst to Luis, he became too harsh on the youngster with dreams of becoming a soldier. He faced the child, made him stand straight, but suddenly retracted and spanked him multiple times. On Saturday, Eugenio's group began their mission with Luis in the car. Eugenio briefed Luis about the mission and handed him a gun. Arriving at the captain's house, they aimed their guns at the captain's wife, causing her to come out in fear. Upstairs, they tied up the captain and their young son, taking them to a room where the man's screams could be heard. Luis remembered the general's inspirational speech at the academy, stirring unusual emotions amidst the operation. Luis entered the room while Eugenio was forcing his way to the captain's son. He suddenly stopped, his vision darkened, and he impulsively killed him. He also went out of the room and shot the other three. The scene ended with Luis turning around and aiming his gun at the captain.